Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar as part of the University of Auckland Postgraduate Week 2021. You're in the webinar for a postgraduate study in education. My name is Gavin Brown. I'm the Associate Dean Postgraduate Research. And this afternoon, we're joined by a number of colleagues who will be sharing about different programs, and I'll introduce each of them in turn. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions using the Q&A option in the toolbar on your Zoom. And hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those live. In the background will be a couple of people from marketing and communications and postgraduate student services who will also be trying to answer questions by in the chat session. So we'll get started because there's a lot to cover and we want to give you a chance to get your questions answered. So why would you choose the Faculty of Education and Social Work at the University of Auckland? First of all, we are highly regarded in terms of our research and clearly experienced as practitioners in both education and social work. We believe our programs are both useful, focused, and customized. There's a lot of flexibility, and that sometimes gets confusing when there's so many options, and we'll try to steer you correctly. Clearly, postgraduate study will help you with your career. There's often promotions or pay rises with getting a postgraduate qualification. It can help improve your practice by getting understanding of things that will help you do better. It'll give you insights into both theory and research and will allow you to join a community of scholars, both junior academics as doctoral students and postgrad students doing research, many of whom are international, as well as domestic students and the faculty academics. Obviously, nothing is free. The cost factors are not high in terms of dollars, but they are large in terms of time and social life and your effort and hard work. For every point that you read about or get told about, you're expected to do 10 hours. So 30 points in one semester is 300 hours of your time. That's got to be paid somewhere. So we want you to think seriously and deeply about the cost of going ahead and the benefits of going ahead. Our programs start very much with an emphasis of being taught. 2 courses will get you a certificate, 4 courses will get you a diploma, 4 courses, some programs will allow you to get taught. A master's at the Masters of Education Practice was taught only. And then you see that there is some teaching component in the Doctor of Education. The other degrees have a strong research thesis component, which you need to think about seriously. Are you planning to do your own independent research with supervision? So there's taught components and research components. And clearly, you need to think about where you are and what you want to do. And we're obviously, as academics, we're keen on the research part. And we hope that you might want to join us to do research. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kane Meisel, who's going to talk to you about the various master's programs. He has the leadership responsibility for these programs. Kane?
Thank you, Gavin. Kia ora koutou. So as Gavin said, I'm the program director for 3 of the 4 master's programs that we offer within the faculty. So the Master of Education, the Master of Professional Studies, and the Master of Education Practice. The Master of Education Leadership is looked after by Dr. Kay Twyford, who'll be explaining that program in a couple of minutes. So just starting with the Master of Education, it's probably our kind of more traditional master's program where you have a research component, so a substantial thesis, as well as a talk component. So you'll see on the left, it's 180 points, which is the equivalent of 1.5 years full time. And as part of that, the talk component is made up of 3 different courses. So there's 2 content courses that you can choose based on what sort of interests you have and what you think that you might want your research to focus on. And then there's a research methods course, which is intended to help provide you with the skills that you need in order to be able to do the research component. The 90-point research thesis is guided by a supervisor, often 2 supervisors, who will sort of work with you along the way. To get into the Master of Education program, you need to have an undergraduate degree in education or a related discipline. So there are possibilities of getting entry even if you don't have an education degree. So for example, we often include people from psychology or sociology within that. The one on the right is really for somebody who's already done the kind of taught component as part of a postgraduate diploma. So if you already have a postgraduate diploma in education, you can skip the taught component and go straight to the research component. So in that case, it's a 120-point research thesis, which is 1 year full-time. And again, it would be guided by supervisors along the way. The other aspect of that is obviously as part of your postgraduate diploma in education, you would need to have completed a research methods course. Next slide, please, Gavin. So a shorter program, which is also a mix of both teaching and research, is the Master of Professional Studies in Education. So it's 1 year full-time. It has only 1 content course because it is a shorter program, as well as again, the need to complete a research methods course. So in this case, it's a 60-point research dissertation. So that's the equivalent of 1 semester full-time or 1 year part-time. My recommendation would be, if you are interested in this particular program, that you look at structuring your research dissertation so that it goes across a full year, rather than trying to fit it all into 1 semester. One of the requirements for the Master of Professional Studies, because it is a shorter program, you do need to have a greater degree of teaching experience. So it's either a 4 years, 4-year bachelor's degree or bachelor plus graduate teacher diploma of teaching, as well as 3 years teaching experience, because that gives you the kind of equivalent of having done additional study. Just going to minimize the poll that keeps popping up. Sorry, can you go to the next slide, please, Kevin? And the final one that I'm going to be talking about is the Master of Education Practice. So this one's a little bit different. It is a taught program. So all of the components of the program are course-based. So there isn't a research or dissertation component. In the 120-point program, you have 4 courses. One is a core content course, so that's a required course, and then you have 3 additional courses that you can choose from the available list. In order to gain entry to the 120-point program, you need to have typically either 1 or 2 years teaching experience. So basically, if you've got a graduate diploma or a postgraduate qualification of some kind, then it would be 1 year of teaching experience. Whereas if you, if the only qualification that you have is bachelor level, then you would need to have 2 years of teaching experience. If you don't have that, you can gain entry into the 180-point Master of Education Practice, which again has that sort of core content course, but it has a wider range of elective courses that you'd need to take. Just in terms of these GPAs, so that you have an idea about what we're talking about, a grade point average of 5 is equivalent to a B, whereas a grade point average of 3.5 is sort of on the cusp between C+ and B-. So as I said previously, this is a taught component, so it doesn't have any research component as part of the program. And one of the implications of that is that if you do choose this program, you can't continue directly into doctoral. You would need to do a research program in order to bridge across. Next slide, please. So just to summarize those differences, this gives you a bit of an idea. The Master of Education program has that large research component, and you can carry on into doctoral studies. Same with the Master of Professional Studies in terms of the doctoral program, but it does have that smaller research component. And in contrast, the Master of Education Practice, the no research component, taught only, you need to be a qualified teacher. And in fact, the Master of Professional Studies, that's also a requirement that you need to be a qualified teacher. And once again, you can't continue into the doctoral program. I noticed in the chat that there is a question about GPA lower than 5. So that leads directly to this particular slide. What happens if you don't meet the entry criteria? So no, it's not a deal breaker. There is the possibility of doing kind of a bridging qualification via the postgraduate certificate in education. So that's available to any qualified teacher who doesn't have an undergraduate degree, or if they have that a lower GPA than 5 or 3.5, depending on the program that you're looking at. And in the postgraduate certificate, you do 2 courses. And if you get a high enough GPA within the postgraduate certificate, you can then continue on into one of the master's programs. And it doesn't mean, it shouldn't mean, as long as you are strategic and get good advice, you shouldn't end up doing additional points in the long run, because you can credit those across into the master's programs. It's also available to people that have the that have non-teaching related or you know, that want to sort of have a bit more scaffolding and bridging into education, but don't have an education background. And that's me.
Thank you. Thank you, Kane. Sorry, I was muted there for a moment. One of the things that the University of Auckland is really proud of is the extensive work that this faculty has done in educational leadership in building the leadership of New Zealand schools. And so I'd like to invite Dr. Kay Twyford, who's the program leader for our Masters in Educational Leadership, to brief you on that program.
Tēnā koutou I tēnei ahi ahi. Good evening. The Masters of Educational Leadership is separated out from the other 3 masters that Kane's just talked about for its leadership focus. So as part of the prerequisite for the enrolling, you need some informal or formal leadership. So it's similar to the other courses, 3 years teaching to get you into the program. So if we look at the Masters of Educational Leadership 180 points, it can be done full-time or part-time like the others. It can have a research component, or it can be fully taught. And the delivery mode can be fully online or face-to-face, or a blended option of those 2 delivery modes. So it's as Gavin said, it's a flagship of educational leadership, and it pretty much is, you've got some set papers that are part of the 180 course, and ones where you've got some choice. So the key thing to take away is that if you're doing a research master's, you need to make sure you've got a research methods course. And if you're doing the taught, you may or may not need to take the research paper. So one of the new forms of the MEd leadership is Auckland Online, and it's a fully online part-time course. It's got 6 papers on the screen, and these follow a carousel kind of model. So you do 3 papers every year, including one across the summer. There's a webinar specifically about MEd online, and that's on June the 9th. So you can enroll for that if you're interested in finding out more. So Gavin, can you go back one slide for a moment?
I will try.
Thank you. So we've got, those are the 2 180s. There's also, just like what Kane was talking about, we have a 120 Masters of Education or Leadership, which involves, it's for those who already have a postgrad diploma and are wanting to move fully into the Masters. So again, the papers are delivered either online or face-to-face, and it depends on the paper. And yeah, so where can the MEd leadership take you? Most of the students on the course use it to improve their leadership, and so it's to do with pretty much across all sectors and to do with promotion through. But there are other options. We have people who are working in tertiary. We have people who are going off as education consultants, learning facilitators, and advisors. So it's an interesting course. It's going to develop your leadership skills, and its focus is on leadership. Thanks, Gavin.
Thank you very much, Kay. Just a reminder to everyone that who's using the chat, could you stop using the chat and put it in the Q&A? That way it's easier for us to figure out if the question that you've posed has been answered or not. So if you've put something in the chat, could you copy and paste it and put it in the Q&A button? Thank you. The next one we want to talk to you about is the Doctor of Education. There's a Doctor of Education program starting in July this year, focused on assessment and self-regulated learning. And the leaders are Associate Professors Helen Dixon and Eleanor Haw. The interesting thing about the EDD is it is a combination taught for 2 years part-time, and then you have the option of doing a 2-year full-time or 4-year part-time doctoral dissertation of between 60 and 75,000 words compared to the 100,000 words for a PhD. So it's 3 years full-time equivalent, with the first 2 years being taught. And you're taught in a group that are focused on the same common theme. And the theme for this year is assessment and self-regulated learning. And if that's not exactly your thing, but you want to do a doctorate, but you need to keep working, this is the program for you. The next year, there'll be new EDD cohorts starting, and Dr. Joe Smith is organizing those now, what they will be. But this year, you have the opportunity to start an EDD if you qualify for a doctorate with the experience and master's degree to do a doctorate in assessment and self-regulated learning. And the key point here is the 2 years taught component allows you to get your head around what the research is that you're going to do, how you will go about doing it, what the ethical issues are in doing it, and leave you with a research proposal that you're ready to carry on with. And so it's a really nice scaffolded, structured way of doing a doctorate when you're maybe a little nervous about just launching straight into a PhD. I'm going to ask Associate Professor Rosemary Earlham to talk about this postgraduate certificate and diploma in teaching linguistically diverse learners, and I'm going to let her explain to you what that means.
Thank
Rosemary?
you, Gavin. Can you go back one slide? This is a new qualification. We're very excited about this. We have just had our first intake this year, and it replaces the previous graduate diploma in TESOL, the graduate diploma in teaching English in schools to speakers of other languages. So we've got a different name, linguistically diverse learners. What do we mean by linguistically diverse learners? We mean learners from different language backgrounds, and many of them also from different cultural backgrounds. Another term that we would use would be English language learners. So next slide, please, Gavin. Thank you very much. We believe that most teachers in Auckland would have English language learners in their classroom. So they would have these types of learners from different language and cultural backgrounds. So this would be a very good reason to do this qualification, so that you would be able to empower these learners reach their full potential. This qualification is open to teachers across all areas of the curriculum, as well as teachers who have primary responsibility for English language learners. So for instance, in a secondary context, you might be a maths teacher or a health teacher, or a physical education teacher with these learners that in your classroom. So this would be a good qualification for you. Many of our students are also working in primary context, and some of them are working in early childhood education centres. So I'm talking about a diploma, but actually there's two qualifications. You can do the certificate, which is 2 core courses. Each course extends over a whole academic year, and you come and attend weekly lectures on Epsom campus. Or you can do the postgraduate diploma. You do the same core courses as the certificate, but you do 2 further elective courses, and they tend to be delivered in blocks, often in the school holidays, sometimes on Saturdays, also taught at Epsom campus. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.
If you can move on to the next slide. Yes, so our entry requirements. You need to have a teaching qualification, and we ask for our applicants to have 2 years relevant professional experience in a New Zealand context. Next slide. This program, we're very fortunate in that most of our students have scholarships from the Ministry of Education. They're called TESOL scholarships, and they fund the core courses. So chances are that if you just want to do the certificate, you can apply for a scholarship if you meet the criteria. But as I say, 90% of our students have scholarships, and that enables you to complete the certificate, the courses for the certificate. If you do, and we do hope you go on and want to enroll in the diploma, for some students, they're successful in securing subsidies from the Ministry of Education that allow them to get some financial contribution towards their elective courses. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Rosemary. Now, Rosemary's ended with a positive note about funding options, and I'm going to ask Antoinette Vaha, who's our postgraduate taught recruitment coordinator, to tell you more about scholarships, subsidies, and study awards. Antoinette.
Thank you, Kevin. Kia ora koutou. So I'll just run through these quickly. In terms of scholarships, we have the University of Auckland postgraduate scholarships. We have the general ones, the Māori ones, the Pacific ones, and also the international scholarships. They tend to be awarded to people with higher grades in your prior qualification. And for the guaranteed scholarships, for example, for the master's programs and the postgraduate and the honors degrees, you don't have to apply separately for these scholarships. We assess them at the same time. So when you apply for example, a Master of Educational Leadership, you'll be assessed for both the program and the scholarship at the same time. So if you hear from the scholarships team, congratulations, you've been awarded a scholarship, it means that, you know, that's good news for you. But if you don't hear from them, it means that you haven't met the criteria for the scholarship. Now, when you read through when you go online and you read through the scholarships information, they don't typically say that this is only available for full-time students. But when you read through the fine print at the bottom of the regulations for the scholarships, you'll note that there's a clause in there that talks about having a maximum of working 500 hours during the funding period. So that effectively cuts out anyone who's working full time. So the reason being is we want to prioritize some of the funding for students who are not able to work and earn money, so we could support them while they're studying. With the subsidies, now this time last year, that's fine, Gavin, thank you. This time last year, I talked about two lots of subsidies. One, the literacy and numeracy subsidies that the Ministry of Education offers every year, and they were offering them for a number of years apart from this year. So the ministry have decided not to offer the scholarships, the subsidies this year. And of course, we at the Faculty of Education and Social Work will try and encourage the ministry to revisit their decision and be able to offer the subsidies next year. But this is my plea to you, teachers who are listening in. You could also approach the ministry from your end and try and get these subsidies reinstated for future years. So they typically fund any courses that have a focus on literacy and numeracy areas, and also courses that you are able to link your assessment, such as leadership courses, link your assessments into improving literacy and numeracy in schools. That's my plea. All right, back to subsidies. We also have Faculty of Education practicum placement subsidies available. So these are the ones that are given out to teachers who supervise our students on practicum. So if you've supervised our student on practicum and within the last 12 months, or planning to pick a student this semester coming up, then you might be eligible to have your first postgrad course paid by us. So we will cover the tuition fees, which is the bulk of the course fee. So each course, if you have a 30-point course, is around 2,400. The subsidies value is just under $2,000. So that's a huge chunk of the course being paid for us. So if you're in that situation, or if you think you might become one of the associate teachers in semester 2 or next year, then you should probably get in touch with me. I currently manage the funding for associate teachers. Thanks, Kevin. So for the next step, so once you've decided that you're going to apply, jump onto the homepage of the University of Auckland, and then there's a blue band up the top. It's pretty easy to spot. Click on that, and then you start your application. If you haven't studied with the University of Auckland, then now would be a great time to fish out those academic transcript, and also your passport or birth certificate or even marriage certificate. If the name of your transcript does not match the name of your ID passport, for example, then we need something in between to explain why there is a discrepancy there. Usually a marriage certificate or something like that. So once you've applied and submitted all your documentation, we will then assess your application. Hopefully we could offer you the program that you are most interested in. If not, for whatever reason, say for example, because you didn't meet the GPA, then we would offer a program such as the Postgraduate Certificate in Education. So once the admission process is complete, then you can move on to to the enrollment. So there are 2 steps. One is the admission step where you apply for the program, and once you're in the program, you can then proceed on to enroll. If you have any questions, contact me. That's my direct email there, pgt@auckland.ac.nz. And I think that's it for me, Gavin. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. And just because we're nice, we've asked one of our students, Jaspa Tata, to share her experience as a Master of Education student. So Jaspa, could you say a few words?
Yeah, so thank you, Gavin. Yeah, so my name is Jasper and I am currently in the Master of Education 180-point program. I started my studies at the beginning of this year and I have really enjoyed the program because of the opportunity I have to select the courses that I want to engage with and the subjects that I'm interested in. And so I've found it, yeah, hugely beneficial. A lot of my peers, teachers, many of them are like DPs. So even just being able to be in those spaces and learning not just from our lecturers, but from each other has been, yeah, just I've really, really enjoyed it and learned a whole lot. And it has been a step up, I guess, from undergraduate studies, but I feel like the support that I get from my lecturers and the teaching staff, they're very understanding and really supportive of students who are teachers, who are parents, myself having 2 children under the age of 5. So yeah, like I'm really enjoying the program so far.
Thank you, Jaspa. What do you think you'll do beyond finishing your Masters of Education?
I think I'm really looking forward to get into the classroom and yeah, like I guess practicing all the wonderful things that I'm learning, but eventually I have the intention on coming back and doing doctoral studies, which is why I chose to stay and do my Masters and do some research as well. So the plan eventually is to come back and hopefully get involved in the teacher education program.
Great. Thank you very
down the
much.
track. But yeah, that's the plan at the moment.
Thank you, Jaspa. Thank you, everyone. We've reached the end of this presentation, but we have an opportunity for you to ask questions that haven't already been answered. I see at least 10 questions have already been answered. So between us, we will try to answer your questions as best as possible. And I'm going to stop sharing these slides so that you can see us all and we can try to answer your questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A and someone from the group will try to answer your questions. So there's one here. Are there any particular pathways or structures in the postgraduate diploma? I'm not best positioned to answer that. Is someone else able to?
Can the person that posted that just clarify which postgraduate diploma they're referring to? Because I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you, Kate. In general, my understanding is a diploma requires 4 courses. So, and there's usually not very many restrictions on which 4 courses will create a diploma. But if you want to go on to do research, either in an MEd or in the doctorates, you have to do a research methods course. So otherwise, you pick your courses in the general programs, or you go into the leadership or the postgraduate diploma in teaching linguistically diverse learners, and you get, those are much more constrained. Maybe that's the question that was being asked. Kay, can you speak to
in terms of, sorry, just I indicated that I've answered live to the question about PhD programs. Do they include taught elements or solely research? So the PhD is a research program. As part of the first year, you can undertake provisional courses but that's not a requirement. That's something that's discussed with your supervisors. The EDD, which is the Education Doctorate, is the one that has the initial taught component.
Thank you. Thank you, Kane. Kyle has asked, Masters in Education Management. Do we have such a program or emphasis, Kay, or is leadership and management that's two words for the same thing?
We have a Masters of Educational Leadership, and they are different, Gavin, but we could argue that later. One of the things I just want to pick up on that postgraduate diploma, in that a caution, if you think of it as a pathway, you can continue if you get, I think it's a B average, into the Masters of Educational Leadership, as long as you don't graduate and get the certificate. Otherwise, there's a longer pathway. So that's just a caution before you get excited after completing the diploma, that you think carefully about whether you'll want to carry on. I've been working with a student today who, in his haste, graduated with the diploma and is now going to be doing a 120 transition into the Masters, whereas it would have only been an extra 2 papers for a taught MEd leadership. So that's a caution.
Thank you, Kay. Yes, for Kyle, education management and administration are not leadership, so they're not opposite each other, but they're not the same thing. And so our program in this faculty is much more focused on leadership than management or administration. Serena's asked. Sorry,
I was going to say, Kyle, if you're interested in educational leadership, as in positional leadership, then the MEd leadership is for you.
Thank you. Serena's asked about the research thesis, and Kane wants to speak to that. Please go ahead, Kane.
Sure. So the length of the thesis is dependent on the number of points. So if you do the Master of Education 180, so then the 90-point thesis is generally recommended to be around 25,000 words. Whereas if you're doing the 120-point thesis, it's around 35,000 words. I wouldn't get too caught up on words though, because it does depend quite a bit on the nature of your research. So for example, if you're doing quantitative research, it's typically fewer words. If you're doing more qualitative research, it's typically more words. So those are sort of rules of thumb rather than strict. You know, it's not a goal. You're not aiming to write as much as you can. You're writing no more than those sort of word limits.
Thank you, Kane. That's an important caveat. It's no more than. Less can be okay, but not more. Thank you. Alex has asked, do you need to be based in Auckland for doctoral studies? Well, that's simple. No. We like you to be in Auckland so that you can meet your supervisors and the other students, but we do have students who are working offshore online, thanks to COVID. But offshore international students are expected to come to Auckland as soon as the borders are open. We do have students elsewhere in the country, but they're expected to come to Auckland to meet face-to-face every so often. So distance is possible, but distance sometimes loses things. PhD research in education, ed and technology for special needs. Well, there is a register of supervisors in the faculty. There is a find a thesis page on the University of Auckland, and there you can search for supervisors who know about these things and who specialize in them. Clearly, because our PhD follows the British model rather than the American model, in that it's no teaching in the PhD, it's research only. So you need to find a supervisor and a pair of supervisors who have research expertise in that area. And there are people in the faculty with emphasis in education technology and special education, and you would have to negotiate with them to getting there. Brief pathway for being admitted to a PhD program. Unfortunately, there is no brief pathway. There's a whole bunch of documentation that you have to upload in the application for admission. And there's a web page with complete instructions on application for admission to PhD. And you have to upload your documents. You have to identify a supervisor who's willing to take on your topic. And the admissions office determines whether your entering grades from your master's qualification are good enough. And then if it's good enough to get a scholarship, that will be determined at that point. And then there is the problem of how do you pay for this? Scholarships are limited, but you will get a chance to. All of that's done in the admission process. And we try to get from admission to decision done in 90 days. So it's not quick. I am a teacher for 6 years in Thailand, and I work teaching secondary student and undergraduate. Can I apply for a PhD in education? You don't have to have a bachelor's degree in education, but you will need a master's qualification to get into a PhD, or at least an honors degree with a research component, a research dissertation in your research bachelor's. So without that, you can do the certificate, diploma, master's route, and then qualify for the doctorate. But direct with a bachelor's degree is not possible. Jeff is worried about his topic or who to approach. Kane, you want to answer this, please?
Yeah, sure. Finding a supervisor is always an important part of your master's or PhD or EDD or any kind of research-based postgraduate study. So it's never too early. I would say yes, absolutely. Don't stress or worry about it to any great degree, but definitely start going and talking to people now. So even before you start, it's definitely good to have those conversations. Bear in mind that is it's a mutual decision. So the supervisor can say no, and often that's because they already have a large number of supervisions and can't take on and give you good supervision if they take on too many students. But it's also within your power to meet with somebody and go, you know what, actually, it's not a very good fit. So I'd rather go and talk to somebody else. So don't feel compelled to take the first supervisor that says, I'm interested, if you don't feel right about it, because it's a large commitment. You need to be working with a supervisor that you feel will support you along that path. And as Gavin referred to before, there is a supervision list that indicates basically the different research areas and interests that we have, what kind of methodologies we use and those sorts of things. So that's a good place to start. And then really it is just a process of emailing and asking to meet with people and going from there.
And of course, if you run into a complete roadblock, the Associate Dean Postgraduate Research, me, can start give you some advice and point you towards some people, because we might have a better knowledge of who's out there. But it really depends on having clarity about what are you really interested in. And the one lasting advice I got from my professor is that if your work is in this direction, your research can't be in a different direction. It has to be parallel and similar. Otherwise, one of those things is not going to succeed, and it'll usually be the thesis that fails rather than your job. So be careful about that. Anonymous, applied for a PhD, didn't get funded. Well, that result isn't going to change unless somehow your supervisor has access to funding different than the University of Auckland doctoral scholarship. So I'm afraid that once the University of Auckland says your grades are not high enough to get a University of Auckland doctoral scholarship, that isn't going to change unless you do a new qualifying degree, like a 120-point master's, and get an A for that. Third year undergraduate, want to do MEd leadership. Can you enroll right away? Kay, can you speak to this question, please?
Okay, not really. We for the Masters of Educational Leadership, you need to have taught for 3 years and have included in that some leadership experience. I think it's important for the course that you've done that so that you can get the most out of the content, because it's very applied to leadership in schools. There are other options, like Jazz talked about, than the MEd leadership.
Thank you. So no, you have to do the time to get into the program, and if you don't want to do that, then you have to choose a different program. And Manal wants to know about how do we find people. Again, write to the Associate Dean Postgraduate Research in the Faculty of Education and Social Work, Professor Gavin Brown, and I will help find. There are advisors in each school within the faculty, postgraduate advisors, and if you at least know which school you're interested in, you'll probably get some help from that advisor. Okay, I think we've answered all of these other questions, unless there's something standing out that we haven't seen. Q&A. Okay. If there's no new questions, does anyone see a new question, or was there something important that we forgot to say? No?
Kevin, can I just add, when Rosemary was talking about the PG Cert and the PG Diploma, for the teachers who are watching, the PG Cert, like having 60 points, is not enough for you to move in the salary scale. Just thought I'll point that out. So you'll need to stick around and complete the diploma in order to move you from, say, if you're in a Q3 with a BEd, that won't be able to help you. So you'll need to stick around and do the PG DIP in order to move you up to a Q4. If you want to hang back and do more courses, like say I'm referring to the Master of Educational Leadership now. So instead of exiting with a postgraduate diploma in educational leadership, but go on to the Master of Educational Leadership, 180 points, then you move to a Q5. So I think it's worthwhile doing a little bit of homework before you exit with a qualification to see what's the impact on you financially in terms of salary.
Can I say something here too?
Please, Rosemary.
That if you need to decide which qualification you want, you can't have both. So you can't finish the certificate and then think, oh, and now I would like a diploma. So you need to decide at the beginning which one, a bit like what Kay was saying, you need to decide which qualification you would like.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. Alex has asked, is it too late to enroll in an EDD? No, we're still taking applications for the EDD in assessment self-regulated learning. So it's still possible, but you would probably need to start processing things quite quickly to get into the program. An MA in Applied Linguistics and TEFL would be enough to get into a PhD in education, provided there was, of course, your grades are good enough and you'll find a supervisor who's willing to work with you on the project that you talk about that they're really interested in. And I see that Kyle has asked, and Kay, can you respond to this question? What can a master's in education leadership lead on to? He has 4 years teaching experience in secondary science.
So I can't see that one. So 4 years teaching means you could move into the MEd leadership program.
And what could that lead on to if he does that?
Okay, so if you, in terms of the university leading on to a
No,
PhD,
in terms of career.
in terms of career, it makes you more, it builds your CV and your expertise, and to be more likely to move to head of department, DP, principalship. So it gives a pathway to show that you have up-to-date knowledge in educational leadership.
Yeah, I would expect that someone with 4 years experience in the field and then gets the leadership masters would be a really good candidate for a head of department job, at least. If not deputy principal or whatever similar type roles. Antoinette, who should Alex contact to get more information about the EDD? Do you have a link for that, please?
Well, Lee is our guru on doctoral, but I think if you email education.auckland.ac.nz with specific questions, we'll send it through to the right person who can help.
Education.auckland.ac.nz.
Yeah, I think Corey is typing the answer. Thanks.
Oh, okay, good. Right, well, we have 5 minutes left, and we don't want to drag this on long, so we got 5 minutes, so post those last questions. Do we need to have a research topic that's focused on New Zealand, or could it be focused on home country, says Manal. Kane?
Sure. This applies to pretty much all of our programs. It can be either focused on New Zealand or focused on your home country. It really just depends on whether you have supervision that supervisors that are in agreement with that focus.
Yeah. One of the, until this pandemic is over, all students doing research work overseas must do it digitally. We're not allowing our students to be exposed to the potential of a exposure to the virus. So you have to do everything digitally until the New Zealand government says, okay, everything's okay now. You can go out to the real world now. So that's a restriction.
Just to add to that, it's not always a requirement to actually go and conduct your own primary data collection. So it is also possible to work from secondary data. So sometimes supervisors have access to databases of existing data, or you could use public data, for example, based on the Ministry of Education data, as well as a range of other sources.
Yes, a very large number of doctorates are conducted with analyzing data that was collected by someone else for a different reason, but is made publicly accessible. And if you become enrolled as a postgraduate research student, we have a repository, a listing of public access data sets. So I see questions appearing and then quickly disappearing, meaning someone's answering them. Thank you, Corey and Grace in the back room. I think we've probably mined this as deeply as we can go in this method. So there is information from Corey about how to get an advisor for one-on-one to talk about how the specifics of your situation could be used to navigate your way to a postgraduate qualification at the Faculty of Education and Social Work in Education. So I'd like to thank you all for your time and for coming along. And thank you to the panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience. And I wish you all the best in applying for and gaining entry to the University of Auckland. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.